Hello everybody, in today's video I'm going to be going over the maps in Dead by Daylight and where they fall, either survivor-sided to killer-sided, and like a little spectrum. There's not much to go over other than the, tiers, and it goes from super survivor-sided, fair, killer-sided, and then super killer-sided. This is going to be a more opinionated tier list because it is kind of how the maps that I feel like are better to play on, but I feel like a lot of people can agree that these are better to play on, or like how they feel as a killer or survivor to play on. So first of all, I'm going to go with Cowshed, and I definitely think that is probably a more like a super survivor-sided map. It has the what is it? It has Cow Tree directly in the middle of the map. It has Shack on one corner, and then it has a very good shed building in the other corner, and it has very strong tiles that connect to one another. It's not as strong as it used to be, but it is still a very strong map. And it just has corn in the middle too, which makes line of sight very hard to have. So yeah, I definitely think it is a more killer survivor-sided map. As a Robs, I'm going to put that as a killer-sided map. The one thing survivors have to look out on this map is 3-gens, and if they do 3-gen themselves, then it does feel super killer-sided. But if you do, watch out for the 3-gens and make sure you're not doing 3-gen. The map is quite easy for survivors. It's just that one little thing you have to play around. Also, the fact that the map is so huge can help out survivors a lot, unless it's a killer with immense mobility, which then doesn't really matter. And then we're going to go on to Wrecker's Yard, and I feel like normally I would say this is a super killer-sided map because it is a smaller map and it does have basement in the middle, but there are a lot of loops that you have on the map. You have Shack directly in the middle, which is pretty good because you can get to Shack wherever you want, and Shack's a strong building. You have the fun bus or the crane that will spawn, which again, for a small map, having such a strong building like that right next to Shack or something can be very strong because you can just chain those tiles in pretty easily since the map's pretty small. And it has a lot of loops. It does have some dead zones though, which is why I do think it's more killer-sided, but it does have a lot of loops, so I think I will put it not super killer-sided, but more to the killer side. Gas Haven, I think it's a fair map. I do think stats for all the Auto Haven records show that it is more survivor-sided, but I feel like that's just because in general the game was more survivor-sided until recently. But I'm not really looking at stats as much as I kind of feel like this map has a lot of it does have a lot of loops, but they're kind of spaced out, I feel like, on this map, and the main building isn't as strong most of the times. I think it does have 2 spawn variations. One of them is better than the other, and it's when the window is at the back of the building, because there's a breakable wall that you have to break, and it's just more distance to cover. And you can get, I don't think Fun Bus spawns on this one. I think it's either Crane. No, I don't think you even get Crane, but yeah, it's a pretty big map, so I will definitely say it is more fair. I don't know why I was having over Wrecker's Yard, but next, Wretched's Shop. I'm going to put that on. Okay, so I would say it was survivor-sided until they did the massive nerf to it, and now I think it's a fair map. Basically, it used to be much bigger, and it used to have 2 vaults open in the main building, which was crazy, and then I would say it was probably a super survivor-sided map, but they cut down the map size, and they only opened 1 window, so yeah, I would say it's a fair map. It has good loops, it's a decent sized map. I think it's about an average sized map now, maybe a bit smaller, but going on to Blood Lodge, I'm gonna say it's super survivor-sided. Personally, I like Blood Lodge, but it's just the fact that there's so much to work with. You get Fun Bus, you get Crane, you get a main building that's pretty good now. They added a breakable wall so that it's basically an infinite loop unless you break the wall, which buys survivors a lot of time. And then it spawns with another variation, which makes it arguably stronger. So yeah, I will say that's better. Again, having Fun Bus and Crane to play around is very good. Shack on the other side of the map, so you can almost always get to some strong building. I will say Blood Lodge is a super survivor-sided map. You might argue just survivor-sided, but I do think it's a super survivor-sided map. Although I do prefer the map just because it is super open. Crota's Asylum. This is tough because in the old days I would say it's super survivor-sided, but they have made a lot of changes to it, and I don't quite know if it is super survivor-sided anymore. I definitely think it is more on the survivor-sided, and if I had an in-between, I would probably put it in between it, but I think for right now I'm gonna put it as survivor sided. No, I think I'm gonna put it super survivor sided. It's still a pretty big map, and it still has main building as a super strong setup. No matter what you do, there's always stuff you have to play around in it. There are still 2 vaults I think in the main building, along with 2 or 3 pallets, 1 on the top floor and 2 I think on the bottom floor, or 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. I don't know how it varies, but yeah, it's a big map. It has shack too, like most maps do. It has a lot of filler stuff. Yeah, so I would say it's probably super survivor sided. Again, you could argue it's just survivor sided after the changes. I have not actually played on it a whole lot, which is weird because I do play a lot of Dead by Daylight recently. So I'm gonna say Clown's map is Crota's Print Asylum. I forget. Father Campbell Chapel. I think it is probably one of the most fair maps in the game. It is a decent sized map, but it's not too big. It's not too big, not too small, but I think it is a little bit on the bigger side. But it makes up for it by not really having a secondary, like, I don't know, like most of, I mean, not a, I don't know why I was gonna say secondary, but a lot of the map is kind of dead zoney, so you gotta kind of plan out your pathing. And main building is pretty strong depending on the setup you get. It does kind of have an infinite loop, but there is a little outplay like potential you have by going like upstairs through the stairs outside. And then it does have shack and normally a tile next to shack that you can chain, but other than that, it's not super big. It has a lot of dead zones and yeah, open line of sight. So I would say it is a fair map. You might say a little bit more towards survivor sided because it does have some strong variations to it, but yeah. Lampkin Lane. Okay, so I have not played on Lampkin Lane a whole lot since the change, mainly because nobody ever really wants to bring the add-on, I think, because I normally bring my own add-ons for maps, but I will say it's definitely not as super survivor-sided as it once was, and you might even say it's fair or killer-sided because playing on it, I kind of felt like it wasn't that bad actually. But I do remember main building still having the problem with having pretty good windows, and if you do have balanced landing, you can abuse it really hard. Good thing is balanced landing hasn't been in the middle for a while, so still has the House of Pain, and yeah. But I do feel like they did a good job on making it less survivor-sided. I'm pretty sure they made the map much smaller too, which is good. Okay, so Huntress's map I'm gonna say is super survivor-sided just because of the sheer size of the map. I think this is the biggest map in the game, other than maybe RPD. So yeah, if you are playing a more mobile killer, it becomes less survivor-sided just because the only reason why it is so survivor-sided is because of the sheer size and how spread out survivors can be. But once you get over the fact that it is so spread out, it's not as bad. So yeah. Going on, we have Coal Tower. I think that is a more fair map in the game. Probably the most fair map in the game, because it has shack on one side and then the coal tower on the opposite side, and then in the middle it's kind of just a lot of dead zone. So you kind of do gotta plan your pathing. I mean, there's a lot of filler in the middle, but that's about it. Like, filler becomes dead zone later on in the game. And the outside of the map is kind of strong, but again, it's a small map, so you can kind of cover it and get over all the strong tiles pretty quickly. The Doctor's map, I'm gonna say, is a killer-sided map. Am I gonna say it's a killer-sided map? No, I'm gonna say it's survivor-sided. Thinking about it now, most killers have, like, their powers kind of choked on this map, especially mobile killers like Hillbilly and Blight and Nurse. It's a lot harder to play on a map like this. There's no line of sight really, so killers are kind of struggling with being able to find survivors from across the map. Let's see, there are pretty good setups sometimes that spawn from windows connecting to other windows, and certain pallets are pretty strong on the map, but there really isn't overall like an abusable building like shack or main building, so I don't think it goes super survivor-sided. But yeah, Temple of Purgation, I'm gonna say is a survivor-sided map. I don't think it's as bad as Huntress's map because I'm pretty sure they nerfed the size of the map, and it does have a lot more dead zone to it. There is still shack, which is a strong building, but yeah, like I was saying, sorry I had to cut it for a second, but shack is still a good building on the map, and it is a pretty big map to begin with. So yeah, there's also a like a down section to it that is takes a little bit of going out of your way to get to. So it's a little bit more survivor sided, but I'm not gonna complain if I get this map. It's open, good line of sight for the most part. So let's see, Pale Rose. I think this is a more fair map. They've reduced the size of it quite a lot after when it first came out. Used to be massive. Now it's a pretty small map. The boat itself is a pretty strong tile. It has a couple good, it has a good vault and then a couple, like another decent vault. If you have like bounce landing, is pretty good. And then it normally will have like 2 pallets, one upstairs, one downstairs. So that's pretty good. And then it has the dock, which by itself isn't that good, but there's a vault under it and a pallet, or 2 vaults and a pallet sometimes. And then there's the mini boat, which is just a vault with a gen on it, basically. So yeah, there's shack too, but it's still a small map and there's not a lot of filler to it. Just it's a lot of trees and kind of dead zones other than that. So I will say it's more of a fair map. You might even say more killer sided, but I don't know. It's hard to judge. Now, this map I think is a little more on the survivor side, just because the main building part of it is more strong than the Pale Rose. You do have 2 vaults. You have 3 vaults, 4 vaults sometimes actually on the upside. That you can create a pretty strong loop with. Not gonna lie. I mean, there's basically an infinite loop that you kind of gotta wait to block off or bloodlust it. And then there's the 2 vaults in the other room, which you can kind of abuse if the killer isn't like playing the best, or if you know you're getting the 50-50s right, or you're just baiting it out. And then there should be 2 pallets upstairs too, and then 2 pallets downstairs, or even 3, I don't quite know. And then there's normally a pretty good vault downstairs too, which is pretty good. And then it has shack, which is another good structure, and its dock is pretty good too. There's normally a vault under it connected to like a T&L wall, or sometimes a jungle gym, which is even better. And the jungle gym normally has 2 vaults too, which is very unique. But overall, it's still not that much survivor sided. It's still a decently like small map, and yeah, not much to say about it. All of the bad ham maps are just super survivor sided in my opinion. I don't complain when I get on them just because they're nice to play on, but they're very massive maps with many buildings on it, with multiple floors and good vaults and some pallets in them too. And there's the House of Pain, which by itself, I mean, there's a reason they call it the House of Pain. It's basically an infinite loop with a pallet in it. Then it's big, and then there's the school building, which basically has very good vaults in it, and then a vault downstairs, which can buy time, and then a pallet downstairs, and a pallet upstairs normally. And then, yeah, it's a very good map. All of them are, basically. The game, I'm going to say, is it's tough, because it's basically just a bunch of god pallets. So I want to say it's survivor sided, just because the line of sight isn't very good, and there's just so many super safe pallets, and a couple very good vaults that you can abuse, like the freezer room vault and the like meat grinder vault or whatever. And then there's normally a jungle gym just somewhere in it, and then a really good T&L wall at a corner. But other than that, it's not super survivor sided, but it's just there's 2 floors to it, and it's just there's just so many god pallets. So yeah, Yamocha's Estate, I'm gonna say this one's killer sided. The spirits map, a little more killer sided. It's a pretty big, well, I don't think it's a pretty big map. It's just a little bit on the bigger side, I think. It might not actually be, thinking about it now, because it's just kind of long, but it's not like a massive map. And then the main building really doesn't have anything besides like a vault that's not even that good, and then no pallets in it either, and that's about it. I mean, you get like this other structure with a vault in it, but that's it, and you get shack. It's also kind of dead zoney too, so it is more on the killer side, but there are still a bunch of fillers, and it's again not a super small map. And I think the Oni's map is super killer sided, just because the main part of it, the middle, is not good at all. It's a pretty small map that you can cut into half kind of and get a really good 3 gen on. There's really no good structure, like god structure on it, other than shack, which I mean every map basically has, so it's very Like, it doesn't have any unique part to it that's very abusable. There are a lot of dead zones on it too, on the outsides of the map, and even in the middle. Only way this map is even good for survivors is if they have balanced landing. But yeah, moving on to Ormond, and I'm gonna say Ormond is I want to say it's like very high on the survivor-sided spectrum of it. You might even argue super survivor-sided, but the problem with Ormond is that they've nerfed the main building part of it a few times, and there's just a bunch of things they've done to it which I think make it not super survivor-sided anymore. And a lot of it is dead zone too, but it is still a very massive map, and line of sight is harder to get on the map just because of the massive main building that you have. But overall, I mean, it has a massive, like I was saying, massive main building with 2 floors, so that's just more space on it, more things you have to check if you're looking for survivors, or you have to be cautious of. It does have shack and some abusable pallets in main building and a decent vault every now and then. But yeah, other than that, its main factor that makes it survivor-sided is just the sheer size of it. But it's not too bad. And then we have Dog Saloon, which I think is a super killer-sided map. The main building can be slightly abusable. There are 2 good vaults on it that you can kind of chain together. Not like super efficiently, but you know, you can buy a lot of time with them depending on how the killer loops it. But other than that, it has shack, but you can actually break shack and make it very hard to loop. And it has a lot of kind of filler that you can just turn into dead zones pretty quick in the game because survivors will just shut it down, throw everything down. I forget what this map's called. It's Macmillan. It's a Macmillan map, and it's a I don't know, big tree map. This map has a is notorious for having a pretty big dead zone in the middle where the tree is. Its only thing that makes it good is the fact that it has a pretty accessible shack, and the fact that the outside of the map has can have some good tiles. But I mean, the outside of the map's kind of dead zone. It's just, I don't know. It's just the fact that it's not a super small map and that there's just a lot of just kind of tiles in it that aren't just super good. It just kind of makes it killer-sided. There's no like big tile that's super abusable like with certain maps. So yeah, I think it is just super killer-sided. So I don't know, not much to say. So let's just move on from this. I'm gonna say Midwich is super killer-sided too. You might say just killer-sided. Maybe I'll go with just killer-sided, just because it is a pretty annoying map to cover, to go all around, and you have to go upstairs and check that every now and then. And controlling gens can be kind of difficult if you're not a mobile killer. And there are some good windows, but other than that, you can kind of break down the wall. And you know, maybe it is a super killer-sided map, because if it's not a killer that you can just hold W against, you're gonna struggle. There really aren't many super good loops, come to think about it. Just kind of break the pallets and the breakable walls, and you kind of just make the map a big dead zone. So yeah, the middle is not very good either. There's like 2 pallets that aren't super safe. So yeah, just gonna move on. RPD I think is probably the most survivor-sided map in the game. It's just so busted. It's probably one of the biggest maps in the game. Definitely like the most space covering. There's an upstairs to it, there's a downstairs to it, there's an upstairs, of course, not a downstairs, but there's like an upstairs area. It's just massive, so many walls to cover around, so many just safe pallets, and like there's a bunch of good vaults too, and it's just a maze, and it's just so hard to navigate as a killer. Moving on, I think the artist map is more of a fair map. It's not like a super fair, like it's not like Cold Tower fair, but it is pretty fair. The main building can have some decent vaults, but you kind of can just break the breakable wall and make them not super broken. Thinking about more, there's shack, but it's kind of hard to get to. It's on the complete other side of the map, like opposite side of the map, basically at the very edge. There's really no super abusable building, because main building you can kind of break down and make just a decent vault basically, and that's about it. It's a decent sized map, but there's a lot of dead zones to it. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in like a fair map, maybe slightly survivor sided. I don't know. Gutten of Joy, I'm gonna say is very survivor sided, much like Ormond. Their its main building is super abusable, like old Ormond. Now it's not as bad, but the main building for this is super abusable. There are a bunch of really good windows and a bunch of god palettes in it. Well, not a bunch, but I think there's one or two, and then just other palettes in it, and just so many windows. And if a survivor has balanced landing, it's so hard to get them. Plus, just so many turns where you might not make their turn when the same turn a survivor did, and just get confused, and it just takes a lot of time to kind of navigate the main building. And along the street, there's like 6 pallets, so if you just run through the street and throw it on every pallet, the killer's gonna have a hard time catching you. The only thing about this map is it's not super massive. It's not like the biggest map. It's not super small either, but it's not a massive map. So I think that's the only thing that keeps it from being super survivor-sided. But it has shack, it has an abusable main building, it has a bunch of filler pallets. So yeah. Let's go to Ironworks of Misery. I'm gonna say this is a killer-sided map. It used to be super survivor-sided before they did the whole infinite rework, but now the main building really isn't abusable besides the top floor, but you can just break that window. There's like normally an infinite window, but you can break it, the wall to it, so it's not that bad. But other than that, like, main building isn't super abusable. Shack's kind of out of the way. It just has a lot of tiles that you have to get through, but get through those tiles and there really isn't much on the map after that. So Suffocation Pit, I'm gonna say that's more of a fair map, maybe slightly on the survivor side, but the main part about it, yeah, I'm gonna put it more on the survivor side. The main problem with it is that you can get 3-gen on the map and then just kind of lose, because all the resources kind of get drained from that area, and then chases are super quick and the gens are super close together. But if you prevent the 3-gen, it is a pretty good map for survivors, especially because of the fact that the main building can normally have a decent vault, and the middle of the map is just so much stuff. Like, there's just so many vaults, so many pallets, just so many tiles. But other than that, it's like, it's a pretty tame map. Just set up a dead zone area and kind of chase survivors in it, and establish a 3-gen as a killer, and it's not super excited. So we talked about what? Now we have, what is this? This is what we had: Ironworks of Misery, Suffocation Pit, Cold Tower. I don't know what this map's actually called. We're just gonna call it Macmillan Estate. I'm gonna say this is more of a survivor-sided map because main building is kind of strong. You do have the one window next to the generator that you can vault through, and then there's normally a window by the 2 lockers that spawn on the thing that is pretty tough to get around, so survivors can kind of chain it into a tough loop. So yeah, there's that, but the map is also pretty big, which I think puts it more on the survivor side, and there's shack at a decent spot on the map too. So yeah, it is more survivor sided in my opinion. Moving on, I think this is Rotten Fields, which I'm gonna put, I don't know, is it super survivor sided? I think I'm gonna put it as just survivor sided. I think this map used to be super survivor sided, but they toned it down somehow. I don't quite remember, but shack is in the middle, which is always very good for survivors. Having shack easily accessible, because you can stall a lot of time just by using the window in shack, not even the pallet. There's a lot of stuff on the outside, but more towards the middle, really all you have to work with is shack, so that's what makes it kind of better for killers, is that shack doesn't connect to anything kind of broken. But other than that, it's just a massive map with no line of sight, so it's pretty hard to catch survivors off guard, since you won't know where they are, but they'll know where you're coming from because of the heartbeat. So yeah. Next we have the other Coldwind Farm map. I don't quite remember the name of this one either for some reason. I don't know why I don't know the name of the map. I know they do. I'm gonna say this map is more killer-sided, just because it's not super big, and there's a bit of a dead zone because of the corn, and the fact that they kind of toned down the main building, so it's not as broken as long as you loop it correctly. as a killer, and Shack is at a pretty good spot, but it's not like super like in the middle like Rotten Fields. So yeah, I'd just say overall it's just a decent map. It's a little more on the killer side, but not too far into it. It's not super big, but there are still some loops, and it's very hard to have line of sight on parts of the map. So yeah, Thompson's house. So this is a tough one. It used to be like very survivor sided, but they kind of toned down how broken it was with the fact that it would chain into so many good tiles, and I think they made it smaller too, but I don't quite remember. I just feel like it used to be a much bigger map. But thinking about it now, I don't know if much has changed. They did make the main building they did make the main building a bit better for survivors, but they also nerfed everything else about the map. The shack is at a kind of inconvenient place far off from the center of the map, so it's kind of hard to get to. There is a big dead zone, so that's good too. The more I'm talking about it, the more I kind of think Thompson's house is more on the fair side. So I'm gonna put it there. Only problem is main floor gen takes a while to get to, so if they leave that gen for last, it can be a tough situation for the killer. So yeah, the silo map. I don't know why I don't remember the name of this map either, but this map is definitely a more fair map too, in my opinion. Main building is not as abusable as it once was, thank God, and shack is at a good spot, but again, just break the pallet, and normally it's not too bad. There is cow tree, which is unfortunate, but Linus, actually, the more I'm thinking about it, the more survivor side it does sound. You have cow tree, the main building, which isn't that abusable, but it does have a decent vault. Normally 2 pallets connecting to it too. Shack's at a good spot, cow tree's at a good spot. There is some dead zone, but also a lot of line of sight blockers. So I'm gonna put it survivor sided. There's also crane or whatever, not crane, the harvester in the middle. So yeah, that's gonna be the tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah.